Welcome to Access Radio. It's another Wednesday. I'm your host, Amy Amantea. My pronouns are she, her. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. Now, Access Radio is the program under the Co-op radio station, and we're broadcasting to you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Peoples. If you're new to Access Radio, well, a big welcome to you. This is a broadcast platform where the content is created, it's requested, it's initiated, and it's governed by folks with lived experience of disability. And well, why is this important? We think it's important because it's super important to honor the Disability Convention of Nothing About Us Without Us. So myself, I identify as legally blind, I'm neurodivergent, and I live with chronic pain and chronic illness. So my intersection with disability is many. But I also feel really privileged to get to chat with folks and to share stories that are relevant and issues that are important to the disability community. And I also like to spend time with our allies in the space. We can't forget our allies. They're also doing important work. I'm also a humble volunteer, as is Victor Schwartzman, who is our technical producer on this program. And well, to be honest with you, just about everyone who works with Co-op Radio. But there are some bills that need to be paid, right? There's equipment that needs to be taken care of. There's rent on the facility. And then there's a couple of folks that are paid to do the maintenance and all of that kind of good stuff. While our stations are back open after the COVID-19 pandemic, we are on Access Radio still working through the power of Zoom to bring you high quality content through broadcast. And this is because we find it most accessible for both our host, myself, and our guests. So friends, if that means that you happen to hear, I don't know, a dog bark in the background or a screen reader or emergency vehicles outside, I think we've learned after a couple of years of this that we can give each other just a little bit of space for any background noise that pops up. But if you like what you're listening to in terms of content, and I absolutely know that you will, perhaps if you have capacity, you might consider making a donation to the station to help us cover all those costs I just mentioned. And you can do that through our website at www.coopradio.org. And a big thank you to folks who have made any contributions or that may make any contributions. It really, really helps to keep this homegrown Canadian content, this one with a disability lens, up in the forefront and on people's radars. Okay. This is like when I get to take the housekeeping hat off. That feels like a heavy hat sometimes. So I take the housekeeping hat off and I just get to chat with some cool folks in the space who have a lot of things to share in today's particular topic, which is the Canada Disability Benefit and perhaps other things where this goes. So I want to invite Michelle and Amanda into the space. Hello to you both.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello. So I know it might be a while since people have heard the sounds of your voices, and Amanda, you're new to Access Radio. So let's do a little like who's who. So Michelle, why don't you give us a little bit of background about who you are and what your lens is?
Sure. I'm Michelle Hewitt. I'm coming to you from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Syilx First Nation, which is also known as Kelowna in BC, of course. And I'm a disabled woman. I'm a full-time power wheelchair user. I have MS, diabetes, and not what we're here to talk about today, but I'm also very excited because this week my dog and I passed the service dog test. So we became a service dog team. So yes, if you hear any noises in the background, it's Leo, the amazing Leo, the service dog. I'm the chair of disabilities. Thank you. There's a whole story about Leo. I've only had him since December, and he was a week off being euthanized in a kill shelter in Texas. So I know, and here he is 7 months later. I trained him and we passed the service dog exam.
Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about this, Michelle, but I'll let you continue your intro.
Yeah, much later. Let's do all the other stuff first. And so, I'm a PhD candidate at UBCO here in Kelowna, where my topic is younger disabled adults who have no other option to live in long-term care. And the reason I'm kind of here today, I'm the chair of the board of Disability Without Poverty. And today I bring with me the very wonderful Amanda Lockitch. So I'll let her introduce herself next.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Amanda. I'm here in Vancouver with Amy, and yeah, I've been struggling with this. I don't identify as a person with disability, although I have chronic health concerns, and I have had a very long couple of year battle with numerous things going on. I am also the mom to, okay, I'm totally biased, but the most adorable, cuddly, autistic child. And so that really started me down a path of advocacy and speaking for my little guy who doesn't speak yet. And through circumstance, I became part of Disability Without Poverty before we had a name, and have been working with the movement since 2020, really, and now I'm part of the BC organizational team to really look at, as we're going to get into, how the Canada Disability Benefit might integrate into existing provincial support.
Yeah, this is, I mean, so many important things to talk about, and it's always really helpful when we have when we know whose lens is what, right? So we know how people position themselves within a conversation. I think that that's always really helpful. So thank you to you both for offering those things in this space. A little bit of background. Anybody, Michelle, maybe I can put you on the spot for this. A little bit of background on Disability Without Poverty and how it's related to the Canada Disability Benefit.
So back in 2020, as Amanda said, things kind of kicked off because there was a throne speech at the start of a new parliament that said the government was going to create this thing called the Canada Disability Benefit. And a group of people came together to start working on that. As Amanda said, at that time, didn't have a name. I joined, I think, before the name as well, but it came very soon after. So I joined early 2021. And since then, we've been working hard to try and be the voice for those people whose voices don't often get heard, right? That so that people can reach out to us, because we know that, disabled people that live in poverty are often at the intersections of many marginalities. Right. And, it's hard for those people to have someone out there fighting for them. So we try to, I'm not saying, let's be clear, a lot of those people are very, very able of being able to stick up for themselves and advocate for themselves. But there is a percentage that just aren't able to do that. And Amanda knows that I have a granddaughter the same age as Eli, who's also autistic, also nonverbal. And they would be a good example of people that need us to speak for them, because neither Kiona, my granddaughter, nor Eli deserve to live their life in poverty because they were born autistic. So, and, a lot of other people like that. So since then, we have done many things to push this thing along. There was a parliamentary e-petition. There's been many op-eds that Amanda's played a big role in helping us craft and get out there into the public. I'm going to met webinars. We've been to Ottawa and twice, but certainly in a big way in October, to meet politicians. We meet people constantly, other organizations, partner groups, whatever we can do. One of our campaigns at the moment is called Budget the Benefit, because while people may have heard that just back in June the bill finally gained royal assent, so it's actually a law now, without an adequate budget to back it up, it's still not going to lift disabled people out of poverty. Right. So we need to keep that pressure on. So so we grew out of that throne speech and have tried to be a force to push this thing along and for it to be the absolute best benefit it can possibly be for the people who deserve it.
Amanda, what would you like to add to that?
I think I would add that our leadership table that again developed over time is made up entirely of people from coast to coast to coast in Canada with disabilities, and have been instrumental in again sort of helping shape, helping guide the principle. And we really have been for the past 3 years laser focused on getting that Canada disability benefit through to what I now call the starting point, which is
Right.
it is law. We haven't finished anything, but we have got to a place that we can really, really start now, because it is law in Canada, and that is that's huge. But there's a lot of work still to go.
It's an
It's
interesting
funny,
process. Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead, Michelle. No, go ahead.
It's funny that the last part felt like the hard part, but really it was the easy part, because it had all the guardrails in place. We knew what had to happen, right? It had to go through, we all became experts in, parliamentary processes, first reading and second reading, off to committee, third reading, off to the Senate, first reading, second reading, off to, we became experts in all of this. And it was hard work, don't get me wrong, but because we had a path to follow, in some ways it was easy. Now we have something that's a little, it's more nebulous, and it's difficult, right? Because we need to try and keep moving this sort of somewhat hidden process forward in a way that we can all keep taking part in, right? And making sure that disabled people's voices are first and foremost in everything that happens.
It's an interesting thing to me because I will say that I'm not an expert in how the parliamentary system works. They didn't do a great job when I was in school of explaining that, or explaining the importance of knowing that, right? So you study it and you go, that's nice, I took the test, I can dump that information, I don't need it anymore, right? So we don't do a great job of educating our own citizens about how this parliamentary system works. But we've got something here that's now law after all these readings and gone back to committee, like you said, Michelle, and after royal assent, it becomes law. But right now, as a law, it really can't do anything, which is funny when you think about the fact that a law and how we, like, how we relate law to, like, to criminals. You break a window, you break into a store, you steal something, the police come, they take you to jail, and there's a whole process there. That the law is something that's in place and active the moment it becomes law, but that's not the case here. So I'm curious about, I think first, just to provide some context for folks who are like, wait a minute, I'm lost, I don't know what the Canada Disability Benefit is. What is the benefit supposed to do for folks? Like, why is it important? And then we can talk about how it relates to being law right now and what that actually means.
So Amanda, do you want to take the first bit and I'll take the second bit, because I have it open on my phone, right? The second part.
Sure. So the Canada Disability Benefit Act is a supplemental income federally ministered federally that go out to the provinces to help supplement existing supports. So it is, in my understanding, meant to be a add-on to existing supports, and the aim behind it is to lift people living in poverty with disabilities at least up to the poverty line. So as Michelle likes to say, we're not talking about rainbow and lollipops. I always say we're not talking about fancy cars and vacations. We're talking about having people in a place where they don't have to make decisions about, can I afford rent? Can I afford medication? Can I afford food by the time we get to the end of the month? So really helping people be able to, at base, live a reasonable, comfortable life. And then what can happen with that? What passions can be ignited? What what extras can people have when they're not stressed about their next meal? And that's,
Right.
it's really hard to even say that that is happening for 1.5 million Canadians living in disability poverty.
Oh,
So to put some,
yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
So to put some numbers to that, here in BC, what we colloquially know as PWD, the Disability Assistance Payment, is $1,428.50. The latest poverty line, and the poverty line is different. There isn't one for the whole country. It's measured by province and by the size of community. So Vancouver has the highest poverty line in the country, and now it's just over $2,300. And Kelowna's is very similar. It's about $20 behind it, but also at $2,300. So that's, $900 behind, right? Is where people are at, to the poverty line, right? And $1 above the poverty line is still the poverty line. Nobody wants to live at the poverty line, but to get people there would be huge. And to put it into context across the country, the poor people in New Brunswick get $768, and the poverty line in Fredericton again is like $2,000. So,
Wow.
We're talking how far people are behind this thing, right? Is so huge. And Amanda said it so well, right? That once you're able to lift people away from that constant survival mode, like, who knows what can happen then, right? Who knows how people can live? And people just don't deserve, through having been born or acquired a disability, to spend their lives living in poverty. That's not fair. That's not Canada.
Not equitable, that's for sure. Yeah.
No,
I think the other thing is, there are, so if you haven't been touched by disability or poverty, you really don't have an understanding. So there's a lot of Canadians, I think, that just need a basic education about it. Disability makes up about 22% of our population. It's the largest minority that anyone can join at any time. And I think people are becoming much more aware of the fact that any of us are one event, catastrophic event away from either poverty or disability or both. And I think that's really starting, to people, the average Canadian who's watching inflation rise and food prices go up and rent go up and all of this. I think this is a great time to sort of broaden that understanding and say, life is really tough. Imagine if you were in a position that you were not able to work, to provide for yourself in that way. And if you do, it gets clawed back, which we can talk about. And the monies that are being given to you are not adequate. They're just not adequate. And I think there's a mistaken belief in Canada from the sort of, every person kind of perspective that our most vulnerable are taken care of, and they're not.
Yeah. Or that our disability benefits mean that we're all going to Mexico twice a year. We're just living off the taxpayer. And I would say, I think the last time Rabia was on Access Radio talking about, just before the bill went to Royal Assent, so it became law, was sharing with us that there are 52 different poverty lines across the country. And that really stuck with me. And Michelle, as you're talking about, the poverty line in Vancouver being $2,300, I'm even saying somebody's got to review the poverty lines as well.
Absolutely.
Because rent right now for a 1-bedroom apartment in Vancouver, where I am, is probably $2,500 just for rent.
Yeah, and the amount of that $1,400 on PWD that's set aside for rent has just went up by $125 to $500.
$500.
So what does that buy you in Vancouver or even Kelowna, right? It's different, but it's still not enough, right? It's still a rent for a 1-bedroom apartment here is still more than the whole of that $1,428.
And also, I think, and also just trying to find a unit that is accessible if you have access needs in that way, right? Then you're already taking away from the pool of, if there's 1,000 1-bedroom apartments for rent, but only 20 of them have, no grade or low grade access, and you're a wheelchair user, then your opportunities shrink.
I think the other thing with
So
that
this
is people can say, oh, well, move to less expensive
Yes.
areas, move to rural things. But, the hubs are where the services are provided.
That's right.
So
Right.
sure, I can move out to the middle of nowhere and pay very little in rent, probably still close to 2,000, but, pay very little in rent. But then I have to have transit to get me to myriad appointments and my services and everything else.
So I think, one of the things we talked about, I wanted to do a quick plug when we talked about accommodation. So Vancouver has a program, or Metro Vancouver, I guess, that is unique in the country called The Right Fit. And there's a whole load of organizations, and I know DABC, Disability Alliance BC, is one of them, that work together with municipalities and with private landlords so that all of that disabled rental stock is pulled out of the general market. Because what happens is, there's a list of people for social housing, and then there's a list of housing that becomes available, and the person at the top gets the house that, the apartment that comes to the top. And if it happens to be something that's accessible, and that person doesn't need that, they get that, and it means that accessible accommodation is taken out of the pot until that person moves out of it. So what a group of people did was they came together for The Right Fit. They made all of these agreements, as I say, with municipalities, private renters, organizations that have sort of social housing associations, and there is now a one-stop place for accessible accommodation in the Metro Vancouver. Only there, nowhere else. So it doesn't happen here in Kelowna. So if that program could roll out across the country, that would just be amazing. So that's the good piece of news. When we were talking about inflation and so on, though, so we hear inflation just went down to, I think, 2.9%, and interest rates still go up because they want it to be down to 1.5 or something. However, food inflation, which is the majority of that, it's a bigger percentage of that assistance amount that people pay when you're living in poverty. Food inflation is still at 8.9% and has been up as close as 11%. We all know that the price of food is going through the roof, right? And so you imagine, and this is something that earlier this year I was diagnosed as diabetic. So it really hit home to me that if you're somebody, so I was able to change my diet. I have that privilege that I was able to, afford the things that I wanted to eat and so on. If you're somebody that relies on the food bank, and we all know our food banks do incredible jobs, this is no criticism of them, but a lot of the food in there is, carbohydrate heavy and maybe processed and that sort of thing, and just isn't the right diet for, somebody with diabetes, celiac disease, whatever it may be. So even the supports that are there for some of the conditions that people may have, just not the things that can help them, right? So it's very complicated, and it's very hard. So we were going to talk about where we're up to now. Shall I move on to the next bit?
Yes.
Sure. So we get, as you say, we get a law, and you think the law's the law and we'll move on. But no, after any law happens, it then has to have these things called regulations drawn up, and they're the way that the law's actually going to, the rubber's going to hit the road, the way that it's actually going to fall out for people and work. And for us, and for the Canada Disability Benefit, it was designed as framework legislation, which means it doesn't contain the details. It doesn't contain how much and who gets it and all of those things that we really want to know. So those are all designed in these next phase, which are called regulations. First of all, the bill has to go through something called coming into force. It could take up to a year for that to happen. We really hope it won't, because then after that, there's another year for the regulations to be written. So at the most, from the 21st of June, there is 2 years until this process is finished. We really hope it's going to come into force a lot sooner than that. Then the regulations will kick off. This week, though, on the 24th, which I think was Monday, Minister Qualtrough, who was the minister at that time, something else we'll come back to, she put out what the engagement process is going to look like. So as I say, I'm going to read some things from what this process will contain, and then we can talk about them.
Awesome.
So in August, there will be an information session with disability stakeholders to establish a common understanding of the process. So that's the next month. From September ongoing, there will be technical roundtables and bilateral meetings with experts, stakeholders, and persons with disabilities on key areas under the regulations. And fall 2023 and winter 2023, so I guess that's like September to Christmas or something, December, there will be an online survey and portal for open submissions to gather input from all Canadians. So that's the first phase, what they're calling the first phase of engagement. And I guess that's something that the government can set themselves. After that, there is a formal phase that is, it has its own laws about it. And so therefore they can't alter it that much. When they start to publish the proposed regulations, it goes into something called the Canada Gazette. And so the first time it's called Part 1, people get to give feedback, and then the final one goes into Part 2, at which time it becomes official. So we have this first Part 1 where there's opportunities for people to give feedback. What I mean is this first section, I won't call it a part, that's confusing. This first section with the August, September and fall, winter pieces. Then we have the formal piece with Part 1 where people get to give formal, and that will be in 2024. Then all of that's taken in and the regulations finally get published. So that's what's going to happen next. Thoughts?
I mean, it's a massive undertaking.
It is. For me, the important part is that the right people get heard. It's very
How do we make sure
easy.
that happens, Michelle?
Yeah, right. It's very easy to keep asking the same people that kind of always get asked. And one of the things that happened recently, the government did this Disability Inclusion Action Plan, and it had 4 pillars. And one of the pillars was for finance and was specifically for the Canada Disability Benefit. And I think it took a year, and it was led by our very good friends at Inclusion Canada. And they wrote a very strong section in their report about all of the people that they wish they'd been able to reach and they didn't reach. And they listed some of the reasons why. And one of the reasons was, so it was, people, racialized communities, Indigenous people, LGBTQ plus, people in institutions, people in our jail system, it goes on and on. There's a long list of people who are, particularly marginalized and at the intersections of many of those places. And they just weren't able to get to them. And one of the reasons was that at the start of it, the government wasn't prepared to offer an honorarium, a payment to anybody who took part. So that meant that if, say, there was an organization in a remote rural community that has good links with local disabled people, but you can imagine they operate on a shoestring, all of a sudden they can't just do this additional work without some money coming in for it, or and it also for individuals, we firmly believe that if somebody is going to give the time to give you their opinions and thoughts that go into building this thing, well, they deserve to be paid for that, right? It's and particularly they're people living in poverty, right? It's like you're basically asking them to do an act of work for free on the hope that they get a decent benefit. So that's, one of the many recommendations that we would have is that to offer people an honorarium for, if you want good quality information, offer grassroots organizations that are out there in these smaller communities or working with these smaller marginalized communities, offer them some money to be able to get the job done. And the other thing is work harder at it. Like, get out there, get talking to people, like find those leaders in these communities. You heard me say my research is these people in long-term care, and 7% of people in BC, of our long-term care population, are this working age, right?
Yeah.
Get into our institutions and ask these people, right? So I feel very passionate that the government needs to work harder at this, and they're not working hard enough.
I mean, that kind of logic tracks for a lot of different things, Michelle. I mean, certainly you know this, that it's really easy to go to the same old handful of folks. The folks that really want to engage in conversation, they're like following things on social media and reaching out to local organizations and saying, when this comes available, I want to know. They're on mailing lists, right? Those folks have access to the information and have participated in many a focus group or conversation around whatever topic. But it's so much harder to try and reach folks who are never invited to that table, right? That are I often call the disability community the second cousin twice removed of the equity seeking group of folks, right?
You got it.
We're part of the family, but we never get invited to the dinner table, right? Nobody's inviting us over to Thanksgiving because you're the second cousin twice removed, right? So that's my little sort of, I don't know, the way of describing how the disability community works, even though, as we've all mentioned in this space, anybody at any time can be a member of this club. But we're still so far
and
sometimes.
And that second cousin twice removed might need a ramp to get in, or the menu to be in Braille, or someone to interpret, or to come to Thanksgiving dinner, or need different food choices. So it's like, oh, do we really have to invite them because we have to do some additional work? Well, damn well you have to.
And I think the other piece of that is, like you suggested, Amy, they might not even know the dinner party's happening. So it's the onus is on, the people that are hosting the dinner party to let them know that it's happening. And
make it easy for them to interact.
Well, that's the thing. They may not have the agency. Even if they know it's happening, they may not be able to say, I'd like to be there. They may not have that personal agency. So that reach out, and exactly what you're saying.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, I've been invited to focus groups before, and then they say, well, this is the location. I'm like, that's 2-hour bus ride from my house. So how else can I interact with this conversation, with this focus group, with whatever? And oh, well, we're really only having an in-person meeting. And this was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But that's also the thing.
So then we say, well, we'll do it digitally. And we say, well, these people, how have they got access to the internet? Well, anybody can go to a library and have an access there. So let's just think. So you want to go to a library and start sitting there, filling out all of these things, talking about the most personal parts of your life, and talking about things where you're not coping, and people walking past behind your shoulder and all of that sort of thing, right? It's not the digital divide, that's for people who, I have a whole, like, going into a library is not easy for everybody, right? It's not if you're somebody who the education system wasn't kind to you, you may see a library as an extension to that, and you may feel that it's a place that's just, you're not invited and you're just not part of that, right? So, so you have to feel that you're welcome to go through the door first. And again, no criticisms of libraries. These are all people that I'm very close to and what they do. But it's tough for people, right? And so you go in there, and now you have to be able to use the computer and then talk about all your most personal things with people walking around behind you, or you go in and all the computers are being used and that was the only time you had that week and the deadline was the end of the day and that's it's gone.
Or the
And that's
computer's
if
not
you,
accessible for you.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's if you live in a community with a library, right? If the
Yeah.
further remote we get, the less reliable our internet connections are, for everybody. If we think of our northern territories, right? They're lucky sometimes if they've got a decent phone line happening. Never mind a high-speed internet connection, right? So
Yeah.
we struggle to get water into some of our First Nations communities, never mind the internet. So yeah, so I think it's like work, and it's not the people, it's not the disabled people who should be doing the hard work. The government should be doing the hard work. Right? Get out there, send people out, go out, find the people, find the organizations, build those bonds, start, get them to start talking. Do it in a way that's culturally appropriate so that they don't feel that people have just come stomping in with hobnail boots and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. What do you?
We know that.
Go ahead.
Go on. No, I was just going to say, even in our easy to access transit and so on wise, we know that our downtown east side community in Vancouver, and I know the homeless community here on Leon and the rail trail in Kelowna, they get research the dickens out of them. I'm trying to find a decent, appropriate word to use there, because people are like, oh, we know where we are. We'll go, we'll just go down and we'll ask them a load of questions. And it's an appalling thing to do because it's a one-way situation, right? Where it's like, here we go again. We give them, what do we get out of it?
Yeah.
So, I believe that the first part of all of this regulation development, this first, we talked about that key stakeholder meeting or whatever in August, it should start off talking about some key principles. It should really start off talking about how do you talk to the disability community, right? Not what, so to start off necessarily, not to start off with just asking them, so how much do you think this benefit should be and who gets it? But it really should be how and who that you talk to. That's where the work has to start. And then you'll get the real answers.
That makes a lot of sense to me because when we think about, I know that there's been a lot of, I don't know, there's been a lot of mumblings and grumblings within the disability community itself, because we all know that we can't please everybody about,
Right.
That maybe this was passed too quickly and it's not going to cover everybody. And I think a lot of that is the fact that people don't understand how the legislation works. But I don't know. I mean, I think your point is fair, Michelle, about the things that should be the groundwork that needs to be laid out in this conversation before we get into sort of the meat and potato, which is never fair to my vegan friends. The nuts and bolts of the conversations, right? What we want to see that. But for the two of you, if you were running these consultations, if you were running these focus groups and asking these questions, let's say we've put the foundation stuff aside. What are the things that you want to know from people that you think will make a difference? Or even if there's somebody listening who's like, I have no idea how I would even answer a question, or I like to have an idea of what I might be asked before I even contribute, right? Because it's also a thing in the disability community. Sometimes we want to know what all the questions are if we're neurodivergent, or before we even engage.
Amanda, I've talked a lot.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amanda.
One of the things that I keep hearing is this need to reapply and reapply and reapply, and especially for people who have a lifetime disability. It's not going anywhere. So the questions about, once I apply and I'm receiving this benefit, can I just receive it until I'm 65, which is unfortunately where it ends, right? I think I mean, all of those questions about, there's a lot of hoops to jump through in order to get something like the disability tax credit, in order in BC to get something like PWD. There's a lot of forms that need to be signed, which is often a process of paying a physician to fill out those forms. There's a lot of hoops. So is there a way to make the barriers to entry a little bit more manageable for folks? I think would be something I would want to know.
That's
I think
really
that's
good point.
massive. I think that's for me, that's one of the biggest ones that, because we often hear that the federal government needs a list to be able to work off. And that list that they have is mainly the disability tax credit, which, of course, the idea of people who live in the severest poverty taking the time to apply for a tax credit when they don't pay any taxes, and it's an onerous process that's going to cost them money that they don't have. Okay, then how does, so what does the federal government, how do they get a better list, right? And for me, it would be for that every provincial, territorial, private insurance program that somebody has already proved that they're disabled, that's it, you're done. Once you're proved, you're in, right? And that you don't have to keep proving that you're disabled, right? Because privilege is so seeped into our system that people that have it don't even realize the amount of privilege they have. So first of all, in BC, 5 million people, a million of them don't have a family doctor. So if you've got medical forms to be filled in, then, and you don't have a family doctor, well, that's nigh on impossible. And if you do get someone to do it, they're going to charge you. And the average rate for disability tax credit form, I'm hearing, can be $150. If you have a family doctor that you've had for a long time and that you have a good relationship with them and that kind of thing, well, often your doctor waives those fees. So, somebody with the privilege of perhaps being able to afford to pay those fees doesn't get asked to pay them. And somebody that desperately needs it to be done gets asked to pay money that they simply can't afford. So, we end up with the system upside down. So I think Amanda is completely right. It's like no more hoops. Like the hoops have been, if you've already jumped the hoop, it's somewhere, and you can prove that, or that, well, I don't, from my mind, we shouldn't be the people doing the proving. Like the provinces should just be handing over those lists, and the federal government has to be prepared to receive them. Right, that's we have computer systems that don't talk to each other and whatever. Well, fix it. That's not our job to fix it. Fix it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think when you said what are the questions you think people are going to be asked, for me, I think people probably know the answers they want to give rather than the question. And the answers are, what would a good benefit system look like for you, right? And it would be, well, enough money to at least get you over the poverty line, that's paid out in a way that is easily manageable to your, so at a regular interval and that kind of thing, and is something that, as I say, your eligibility is easily taken care of, and if pretty much guaranteed it's going to be means tested in some way, and is means tested on the individual, not across a family unit of some sort, so that the individual disabled person has the dignity of having that money for themselves, and it's not something that is just because somebody in your family earns a decent wage means that you as an individual never get to have any money, right? So
right. I think the other piece that crops up, and this is probably a whole, other hour-long conversation, and it was a very contentious issue when the bill got passed, but this idea of clawbacks and provincial clawbacks. I was in a meeting with BC People First the other day, and somebody said, are they going to raise our rent? If they're giving us more money, is our rent going to go up? Which is an excellent question, right? Because we know this idea of giving with one hand and taking with the other has historically been in play. And how do we, how do we prevent that? How do we work at not having that happen? And we know that when we're talking about clawbacks, we're not talking just about money changing hands. We're talking about services, we're talking about equipment, we're talking about all of those supports that go in. What might change? And that is what do you not want to change, I think would be a great question.
Absolutely. So I think I may have talked about this on here before, but when I spoke to Sochi, the Senate committee on this, I gave an example of a woman that I don't know who lives in Alberta, but I read it in the news, and she is a young woman with spina bifida in her early 20s who, likes to go out and socialize with her friends and so on, and uses incontinence products. And this is the real life story of disabled people, right? It's not all, roses and puppy dogs, even though mine might be puppy dogs, but it's, we have bodily functions that need taking care of. And so Alberta had one type of low profile incontinence product that she would use that, she could go out in jeans or leggings and all would feel good. Well, somebody somewhere decided that it would be a good thing to change that to basically a bulky adult diaper, which of course no longer, that she said, I don't feel I can go out with my friends anymore. I just feel that everybody can see it all the time. And that's a clawback, right? Somebody made a decision about a product that was available that was going to cost them, I don't know, save them 50 cents on each one or something in the bulk that they would buy them or whatever it is. And they decided that that would be an okay move to make. Well, it's not, right? It changed the quality of life of this young woman, right, and anybody else, that it changed it significantly. Mm-hmm. So, I think Amanda is completely right that one of the things must be that up until now, we've been working very much federally, and this is why at DWP we have people like Amanda and her team who are now working provincially to talk to provincial governments and say, hey, this is what you need not to do, right? As opposed to what you need to do. You need to not the situation can only get better from here. You can't take away bus passes, or you can't say that this is a additional income and clawback against the employment allowance, or that sort of thing for those people who are able to work, and the number of hours that you're allowed on top of PWD and that sort of thing. People's lives are meant to get better, not stay the same or indeed get worse. So Amanda, absolutely spot on. Clawbacks is something that is the number one issue, I would say, that the disability community is so afraid of. Am I going to lose what I already have? Am I going to lose care hours? Am I going to, all kinds of things? And so I think it's insidious that people are living in that amount of fear over something that's meant to make such a positive change to their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like, again, it's a big conversation, and we're still maybe 2 years out from anybody receiving any money and knowing what that looks like. And I think you all just said something about the fact that this only goes to your 65 anyways. So I'm assuming that after you turn 65, then you're moved on to the old age security and GIS kind of system. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the combination of that, people get 1,700 and something. So people, there's going to be a bizarre reckoning that needs to happen, because hopefully, right, because those people are living in poverty as well. So we need seniors to be lifted out of poverty, but that shouldn't. How can I put this? We can't now say, well, we'll only give disabled people the same as seniors are currently getting, and because we have to keep everybody in poverty. Like I can see the bean counters are going to find some easy solutions that are not going to be at all socially acceptable.
Yeah. Well, and when you have the layer of disability, and many seniors have disabilities, but many don't, right? But
Right.
like if you're using a screen reader program, or if you have a power chair, or that, like there's additional expenses that need to be
So
considered. So
here's
if you're somebody, I'm just
here's a
like
good one.
pulling this through my mind. If you're somebody who's on the Canada Disability Benefit, and you, let's say for all intents and purposes, you're given the let's say you're given up to that $2,300 a month, and then you transition at 65 to the old age security, but that number is lower. then
Absolutely,
it's
right?
another kind of clawback.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Anyways,
So here's a good one. Here's a good one for you, Amy, going back to our service dog mention at the start. My dear Leo, if you're somebody who's on PWD and you have a guide dog or a service dog,
Yep.
you can get an extra allowance of $80 a month. Once you become 65, that stops, because because presumably you became 65 and the dog doesn't cost money, or you don't need it anymore,
There's
or
no
like
food,
where
or
the
there's no
hell
more vet services, or all of a sudden you don't need a service dog anymore.
So we already have these ridiculous situations going on, right? We just don't want to make them any worse. So we'd like to fix the ones that we have. So
how do we encourage people to get involved? Where do they go? Who do they visit? How do they find Disability Without Poverty and, remain in the conversation?
Yeah. One of the big things that we have running right now is a postcard campaign that is addressed to Minister Freeland, which Michelle mentioned earlier, which is our budget the benefit. We want to see a massive line item in the federal budget that will give us hope that they are serious about lifting people out of poverty. And so any of us can be reached at disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca if you have access to a computer. And from there, again, you can reach anyone. So I'm Amanda. I work primarily in BC and have postcards to give to people. The postage is paid. You just have to pop it in a mailbox. So we're working through that campaign. Michelle, I don't know if there's other tools as well on the website. Other ways.
And there's a digital postcard campaign if we can't get a physical one to you, and certainly for somebody who is blind or low vision, that will work better, because with a screen reader you would be able to use a digital campaign more easily. But certainly we have a Facebook page as well. We're on Twitter, Instagram. So I laugh as I say Twitter, because I don't even know what to call it anymore, if it's Extra or something. So as long as Twitter is still around and not circling the drain, we're on Twitter if anybody is on that. And we will, as soon as we hear anything on that kind of convoluted process I talked about earlier, we will be pushing that out as widely as we can, and asking people to please take part. I've often said to people that if you're asked to give your opinion, and please do, because we are not going to change people's minds without us collectively doing that, right? If you are an ally, a friend, please feel free to say, this is what I hear my disabled friends telling me, right?
If I could also do another small plug for an organization that we've been working with called Curaco. They used to be Kudos, they're now curaco.ca. We're doing one-on-one, helping people build their story, their advocacy story, and we will be doing some video ask presentations through that as well. So there's a lot of support, especially for those who might feel overwhelmed, or the person who doesn't have the agency to ask to come to the party. Ways to reach out to help people feel more comfortable, more confident, more secure in saying, this is who I am and this is what I need. How can I help you give me what I need?
Yeah. Can you?
And that's Amanda. That's spelled
that.
CURIKO.ca. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
What does it stand for? Do you know?
I'm
Sounds like an acronym, but
No, it's not an acronym. I think it was a kind of portmanteau of a number of different. They had gone through a number of evolutions, and I think this was the evolution that brought all of it together.
Awesome. Okay, Kiriko. This has been a lovely conversation, and I appreciate the two of you being here so much. But in our last maybe 2 minutes, Michelle, you want to tell us about Leo?
Oh, Leo. So my darling boy that I got from an amazing organization called Helping Paws Okanagan that brings rescue dogs out of Texas. And I thought I was getting a pet because I'd lost my darling Bernese Mountain Dogs a few months earlier, the last of them. And I got this boy, and he was so damn smart that we worked on passing this 40-point exam to become a service dog. And at another time, we should perhaps talk about,
I'd love to.
service dogs and guide dogs. And I can suggest somebody else that could be on the call with us to talk about how that works in BC, or perhaps doesn't work, would be another way to put it.
Yes. Well, there's the difference between the legislation, the Guide and Service Dog Act, and how you privately train and what that. So it sounds to me, Michelle, like you privately trained your dog.
I did.
Literally what the hoops are you have to jump through and how often you have to do that training.
Well, and the privilege that's built into that, right?
Yeah.
So the first part of it is, how does the animal get out of your vehicle? So there's a presumption there that you have a vehicle, right?
Yeah.
So,
interesting.
anyway,
yes,
another day, another time.
I will poke you, and we will have a full conversation on some of these things, because I think it's a wonderful conversation. My friends, thank you so much for this. I know that you'll be back in this space talking about the Canada Disability Benefit again. It's not going anywhere. Certainly, we don't want it to go anywhere. But we do need to get involved as a community, because I think one of the criticisms often of the disability community as a whole is that we don't rally the same way as some of our other equity seeking, folks in equity seeking communities. That we just, our needs are also different in some ways, that we just don't rally the same way. But our need here should be to lift people out of poverty, whether you're in poverty or not. We should all have the same desire for in allyship for folks who are below that poverty line. So I just want to thank you both again for spending your time on Access Radio.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you very much, Amy.
And for our listeners, please join us again next Wednesday on Access Radio. So for all of you out in Access Radio listener land, I guess I would call it, we've brought you many episodes on the Canada Disability Benefit. We have followed its trajectory from humble conception, I suppose, to feedback sessions, to the folks from Disability Without Poverty who have been working so hard and working with the community to advocate for this, to Royal Assent, and now that it's law, we'll continue to follow this through the regulation building. And I want to just encourage folks to get involved, right? This is a benefit that is to support those of us with disabilities who are living below the poverty line. And as we mentioned earlier, there are more than 52-ish poverty lines across this country. So the disability benefit is a top-up that's going to look different for different folks in different provinces and territories, different regions across Canada, modeled after the guaranteed income supplement for seniors, which I think is a good model. But it's not a perfect bill, friends. Let's be honest. It's not a perfect entity. And we will continue to work with the folks at Disability Without Poverty to learn more about the Canada Disability Benefit, where things are going, and hopefully it doesn't take 2 years, as Michelle pointed out, that it could likely take up to 2 years before we start to see money going to people who desperately need to not be living in poverty. So continue to listen to Access Radio, and thank you so much for being an active listener and jumping into this conversation, and of course doing what you can on your end to write letters and to reach out to your local MPs and MLAs and just like advocate any way in which you can to make this happen. If you are not on disability yourself, you likely know somebody who is on disability benefits, and it would be helpful if all of us were lifted up, at the very least, to the basic poverty line in which province, territory, or region in Canada that we live in. So thank you so much for listening. Please join us next week on Access Radio.